if you're going to do an elevator pitch, somehow find a way to relate your product to something similar that has already proved to be successful. So like what I said was, it's Harry Potter meets Game of Thrones with a Jumanji setting. Those are three very recognizable IPs that have all proven to make money. So now you've thrown them together, they're intrigued. These three things don't seem like they should go together. How does this go together?
Hello, and welcome to Most Writers Are Fans, the podcast that explores the intersection between writing and fandom. My name is Terry Bartley, and I'm your host. So this episode is pretty exciting. I talked to Brooklyn Quintana. Brooklyn is I'm going to call her a fantasy writer, author. I boothed with her in Florida at a little adult book fair thing that was pretty cool. But the thing that impressed me with her, and I say this in the interview, but she's so good at her pitch, the elevator pitch. And that's something that I think that as authors, we sometimes either neglect or we just sort of hate doing, because it's compressing all of our ideas into a couple of sentences. So that's sort of what I talked to Brooklyn about, as well as many other things. She's a fun time. It was a great conversation. So stay tuned for that. And for the intro today, I want to talk a little bit. So I saw my psychiatrist a couple of weeks ago. And whenever I saw him, this was right as we were starting Christmas break at the school. So I was fresh from work. And I was talking to him about what I had done. And I was especially expressing sort of frustration at not being able to write as much as I want to, which you guys have heard me do week after week after week here. Which is honestly the reality of having a full-time job and family responsibilities and trying to be an author. It's just hard to find time for everything. And that's fine. That is fine. That is what it is. But I was just expressing frustration because it was the thing that I felt I had to make time for. And then at a certain point in the session, he was like, "Hey, you're a teacher. So if you could give yourself a grade, what would you give yourself?" And I was like, "You mean at living life in general?" He was like, yeah. If you gave yourself a grade for life, what would it be? And, I thought about it, and it wasn't a hard answer, first of all. I'm just going to give you a bit of a breakdown. I'm doing a lot, I do a workout regularly. I just started doing this with Trainwell, not a sponsor, maybe one day. But it's a really great program that just sort of gives me I have a coach that just sort of helps me keep track of my workouts, which has been really great. I'm also staying with my grandma on the weekends, getting dinners ready for the family through the week. And then I'm editing when I can. I am doing the podcast regularly. Right. I have, you guys, if you're listening, I've increased production to the extent that I have podcasts coming out every week. I've also been a full-time teacher and doing work as a teacher and all those things. And I was even doing some extracurricular work kind of stuff, trying to figure out some parameters for clubs and things like that. I've been working on trying to put together a student-led journalism group, as well as a student-led speech and debate team. So I've been doing a lot. And also I finished a grad school class. Truly, it's sort of endless how much stuff I've been doing. So whenever he asked me, I was like, honestly, if I were one of my students, I would get an A, but I also would be hey, you could maybe back it off a little bit. You're doing too much. And that's just true. I am doing a lot, and I'm aware of it. And I'm not I think that I'm starting to understand straight A kids because there is something about just sort of accomplishing things, and the accomplishment is the accomplishment. Having getting the best you can on the thing, is the accomplishment. I got an A in my grad school class, and I would have been sort of upset if I didn't, And it's just sort of part of it. And on the way, so then I got in my car after the psychiatrist appointment, and Defying Gravity came on because I've been obsessed with Wicked lately. Wicked, by the way, if you've not seen Wicked, I can't imagine you haven't, and I'm the one telling you this, but go see it. It's so good. But Defying Gravity came on, and I found myself I'll just say it. I found myself holding space with the lyrics to Defying Gravity because, we love to jump on memes about a month or two after they're relevant here. And I thought about the fact that, in Defying Gravity, what it's about is sort of throwing away expectations and sort of doing more than anybody would think you're able to, right? Sort of achieving more than people would expect you're able to. And, like in the world of Wicked, like she literally defies gravity, right? Like she's literally flying, she's doing the impossible. But I came to realize that, us as independent creatives that have full time jobs or doing other things on the side, like that's what we're doing in a literal sense. We are defying gravity in that we are doing the impossible. Like whenever my psychiatrist had me grade myself and had me sort of like break down what I'm doing, he was trying to tell me to give myself more credit, which, as an ADHD symptom is a thing that I'm not good at. All of those things are true. I'm not criticizing that. But what I am saying is that like people sort of expect that after you work your full-time job and go home and do whatever family stuff, like then you're done for the day and you have like other stuff that you do that is just like casual or whatever. And the truth is that is not my life. And it has sort of never been my life. And that's okay. Like that's fine because that's who I am. You know what I mean? And like I do defy gravity on the regular. And that just is what it is. And maybe that is the thing that I need to start giving myself more credit for is the fact that I'm not just doing something hard. I'm doing something that is practically impossible for many people. And guys, if you're doing the same kind of stuff that I'm doing, like you are doing the impossible. Like you're doing what people think are impossible. And honestly, like just the truth of it is like going against the grain, the things we talked about before in here, like doing what society says is like too hard or like what you shouldn't do, like just sort of going after a creative career. Like you may not be defying gravity, but you're sure pushing against it, you're sure like pushing against the gravity is weighing you down. Um, and I think that is just sort of like something to keep in mind as we do this because I so regularly like give myself a hard time because it's like I know I did this and this and this, but I didn't write today. Like I didn't do the thing I wanted to do. And also I think it's hard because whenever you have goals that you really, really want to accomplish and you're not getting to them, it's frustrating. But I think that sort of realizing that you didn't meet it because the thing you're trying to do is like literally impossible or practically impossible at the very least. Like that is something good to remember, and you can't be hard on yourself about that. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't keep trying, you know. So I don't know. So if you ever feel like you're down, like listen to Cynthia Erivo. She kills it on Defying Gravity, and she makes me feel like no one's ever going to weigh me down, and that's pretty cool. All right, so stay tuned. We'll be right back with my interview with Brooklyn Quintana. Welcome back to Most Writers Are Fans. I'm joined now with Brooklyn Quintana. We met over a year ago, we just decided, which is sort of like, wow, where does time go even? We were at it was an adult book festival in Florida, and it was a really good time. And it's great to see you again, Brooklyn. How have you been?
But thank you. It's good seeing you again. Also, thank you for reaching out. And yeah, the Writer's Block bookstore puts on really great boozy book fairs. So I've been to a couple of them now, actually.
Yeah, so go ahead and tell us a little bit about your books, first of all, just to give the audience a sense of who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I have two books currently out, Phineas Fogg, Nine of Swords, and Phineas Fogg, Blood in the Water. They are installments 1 and 2 in a planned 9-book series. Book 3 is going to be coming out next year in 2025. They are dark fantasy adventure. Book 1 is tropical jungle nightmare fantasy. So think Harry Potter meets Game of Thrones with a Jumanji setting. And book 2 is more dark mystery. There's a cult at work. We don't know what's going to happen next type of deal. So, and then book 3 is its own vibe entirely, but I can't tell you anything about it. Otherwise, it would spoil the ending of book 2.
Yeah, love when you see series that have super distinct differences. So love that. Love that. Very cool. How long have you been writing, Brooklyn? Have you been writing for like your whole life? Have you been seriously considering it for a while, or?
So I've always been writing stories since I was a little kid. I found out very early on in school that like language arts and writing classes in English was where I was excelling most. So I just put most of my focus there because I was just naturally good at it. So I didn't pay a lot of attention to math or anything. And then yeah, I went to the University of Central Florida and got a degree in English literature and creative writing. And in 2018, I believe it was, I decided to write full time as a career. So it's been a while now.
Yeah, so had you been like doing short stories and things before that time or
Not really. I'd always been kicking around the idea of writing a novel. The 9 book thing wasn't really the initial plan when I started writing, it just came about. And recently I've been kicking around the idea of actually doing like anthology short stories and publishing them to the website as like a compendium to the Phineas Fogg series. So you can see other people's stories going on at the same time as Finn's or before or after, and just kind of building out that world and making it feel more lived in and real.
yeah, so what made you like make the jump from, I'm a person that writes stories and loves storytelling to somebody that I want people to read my work. Like my stuff is something that I want people to consume.
I guess I've never really been shy about people reading my work, so I never had to make that conscious effort of trying to be confident enough in showing people my work. I've always been the kind of person who, like, even as a kid, I'd write short stories and be like, everybody has to read it. I would give it to my teachers to read out loud to the class. So I never had that problem, I guess. Um, but I guess finding a story that was worth telling and that I was going to be passionate enough and compelled enough to have the conviction to go out there and make it my full time career and try and convince everybody else to read it, that maybe took a bit more because it's not so much just a confidence in yourself. It's like now other people actually are reading it, and it requires a bit of like toughness because it's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. So when you get those first couple reviews that are like, didn't like it, you kind of have to just roll it with it and say like, okay, well, it's still what I'm going to be doing. So maybe it wasn't for you, or maybe things can be fixed and adjusted. And I think when you write a series, one of like the fun things about it is that moving on from book one into book two, I had seen and heard what people were saying about book one. So I didn't necessarily change my story. I just kind of adjusted things here and there because it's learning, you don't start off a Supreme Court justice. You're like a law clerk at first. You have to work your way up. So you're not going to start off probably as like a Hugo award winning author. You kind of have to, fine tune things, get used to the job, get used to how people in modern day want to be told stories. Cause I recognize book one, I may have told a bit more Tolkien esque than necessary. So it's a learning curve. You got to adjust and you got to overcome those hurdles.
Yeah, and I think that as a reader, like that's what you want reviews to do, right? Like you want to, if you actually sincerely provide constructive criticism in your review, you'd like the author to take them seriously and actually like grow and get better from them, which I think is why reviews are so frustrating as authors because like it doesn't matter how good it is. If there's a line in it that sounds negative, you're going to think it's the worst review you've had, and you're trash and nothing you've ever written is good. So,
Oh, definitely. I recently got, in the span of, I think it was like 2 days or something, I was checking Goodreads and I got one 5-star review and one 3-star review. And despite how positive that 5-star review is, I honed in on that 3-star and I was like, well, what did you not like about it? Tell me everything. I have to know. And I was like turning it over and dissecting it over and over and over again. And I would ruminate, and I'm a ruminator. I recognize that's not great, but I was like, it like festered with me, and I was like, okay, but you didn't like that there's fight scenes, but it's a military book, so I don't know how to help you there,
yeah.
things like that. So there are some times where like critiques are very valid. Like things with like pacing, people either like slow stories or they don't. It's okay. But then I had one review that said, I don't like it, it's fantasy. I was like, I really can't help you there because it is a fantasy book. It's gonna be fantasy. So it clearly wasn't for you, I
Yeah.
guess.
And what's so funny is your cover isn't even subtle. Like it's pretty overtly fantasy. So the
Right? I
idea
mean, I
that
feel like everything about that book screams it's clearly fantasy. And then for somebody to pick it up, read 772 pages, and then finish it, be like, "No, I hate it because it's fantasy." It was just kind of like, okay, that's
you could have
that's
just
on
not picked it
you.
up. That's what you could have done.
Exactly. Like, I appreciate your business. Don't get me wrong, but it's kind of on you. It definitely let you know very quickly it's a fantasy series.
Well, on those reviews, I don't mind because then at least you're like, all right, that's on you. Like that's
Exactly.
not me.
Exactly. It's the ones that you're like, "Ah, you read it and dissected things." That hurts more because you had a valid critique, but people who are just like, "Nah, fantasy." I'm like, "Wow, that's a you problem, not a me problem."
Yeah. And two, I think that like what's so hard about those like 3-star reviews is like we think of that as negative because it's not a 5-star, but like it's not. Like 3 is still like average, which God knows, like, it's to be an average author and to be successful, like, please, all day, but it's hard to not to like see less than 5 stars and be like, that was a good review.
Exactly. I mean, even sometimes 4-star reviews, I'm like, "Yeah, but why'd you take off that last star?"
Yeah.
Like, I need to know. I'm the kind of person who really should stop checking Goodreads because I even when they're 5-star reviews, I still will nitpick at them, which I'm sure annoys everybody around me. But, like, I wanna know, you put as an author, you put so much work into things and you're, living with these characters and you're crafting this world and this backstory and this lore. So the moment anybody says anything other than "It's fantastic," you wanna know why. Like, if I could call up every reviewer and be like, "But explain to me, even when you liked it, I need to know why you liked it."
Yeah, so you said you started writing full time on a good bit ago, honestly. So
Mhm.
what has that process been like for you? Like that transition? Do you feel like it's been
Oh, I love
challenging,
it.
exciting? Like,
I mean, it's definitely challenging when you have a creative career because, I mean, as we've touched on a couple times now, it's very subjective. It's not like you're building a rocket ship and either it makes it to space safely or it blows up. Like, that's how you know you did a good or a bad job. With writing or any artistic field, it's very much what the person who's picked it up likes and what they don't like. So some people may love it, people may hate it, some people may be lukewarm, tepid interest in it. So there's no clear cut. Even you can't even say like books that do very well and make a lot of money and get the author famous are well written. It's just what was popular at the time half the time. So it's very hard. There's like no litmus test for have I done well as a author or even like an artist and things like that. It's very difficult sometimes when that's your career because sometimes you want to sit down and have like an interview with your boss, a one-on-one, like, how am I doing? But you're the boss also, so you have nobody to really give you that objective feedback most of the time, which can be very frustrating. I came from the corporate world. I worked in finance and law. So it's a very black and white subjects. So you would have your one-on-ones with your boss and you were either doing well or you weren't. So that aspect I just kind of miss. And I miss the structure because you go to work at this time, you leave at that time. And when you're, professional artist of any kind, it's whenever the creativity kind of happens upon you that you're like, oh, I have to do it now, even though it's 3 in the morning. So that could be very frustrating, not only to yourself, but everybody who's in close proximity to you. So that transition was a bit hard, but I really love it. I wouldn't be doing anything else. I'm so excited to be, getting ready for book 3 to come out. And then after that, there's 6 more. So I'm really enjoying it.
yeah, and I think the thing that's so dangerous with like trying to get feedback when you're self-employed or a creative person is you start attaching value to like numbers on things like social media or book sales or any of those things. And that's never like healthy or helpful. Like it's always sort of damaging to like because it doesn't matter how big they are if they're never big enough.
Exactly, because I feel like, especially as like independent author, there's no real metric for where you can measure if I hit this number, I'm now successful.
Yeah.
It's not quantifiable like that with like other jobs would be. So I do exactly what you said is not a good thing to do, and I recognize it's not great. But anywhere I go, I'm like, okay, I sold this number of books, and then I'll check my reports, and I was like, I sold this many on this platform, this many on this platform. Oh, I have this many TikTok followers. I'll sit there and scroll my data analytics because I do a lot of social media marketing and things. And at one point, for whatever reason, I lost 400 followers, and then 2 days later, shot up with 700 more, and I was like, okay, but why? Why in this span of time did this fluctuation happen? It wasn't like a negligible amount. And I hone in on things like that, which are good for the business side of things, bad for your own personal well-being and like tranquility.
Well, the other side of a creative career too, especially as an indie creative, is that you not only do you attach value to things like social media numbers, but also it's very very hard to detach yourself as a person from your work. And
Yes.
it is hard to not take everything personally because like in a sense you are your brand. You know what I mean? Like your social media is you, even though it's not fully you. And it's one of those things that's very hard to like separate and not take personally everything that comes your way.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of like you touched on it really good is that you are your brand. And when you're doing it every day and you eat, sleep, and you're breathing this, and this is your career and it's your ambition, it's all you ever dreamed about as a kid. It becomes very difficult to separate personal you from professional you. And professional you, oftentimes, I at least know for me, is a very curated version of myself. I'm not going to sit here and tell everybody every single opinion I have because I don't want to alienate anybody and want everybody to read my book. And I'm also, going to talk more eloquently. I'm going to give better answers than I would if I was just sitting at an Applebee's with my friends and they asked me the same question. So professional use, very curated. And sometimes when people like that version of you and that version of you takes off and gets views and starts driving like more sales for you, whatever you're selling, your art, your books and things, it's very hard to think, well, is that who I need to be all the time? And then sometimes, like, your actual personality will come out in an interview. Not that this isn't my actual personality, but the less professional side of me that's more jokier things. And then I'll leave an interview and say, oh my God, I wasn't professional enough. And my friends will watch or listen and say, "Oh, you sounded just like you." And I'm like, I know, but that's the you that you know. This is professional me has to come out, and this is my career. So they have this weird Venn diagram of like you are both, but you're also kind of separate entities. And I think also when it is your career and there's no boss above you and you're the one driving all of this, you have to remember to switch on and off as to like, this is a career setting. I have to network. I'm doing an interview and now I'm chatting with my friends. Cause a lot of times when you do like podcasts with people and things, it becomes very conversational and easy. And you
Yeah.
have to remember, you're like, oh, no, no, no. I'm at work right now. I have to sell my product. We're not just chatting. So I think, like you said, there you are your brand, but when your brand is you, it just becomes very muddled sometimes. And it's very awkward with people. Cause then I've had people come up to me at events and say, oh, I've seen you on TikTok, I've seen you on YouTube. And it's very weird because you're like, yeah, you have, but I haven't seen you. So there's this weird social
Yeah.
thing going on where you know me and I don't know you, but you only know a portion of me. And you have this interaction with this person. And it's so strange for you as like the creative when you're like, I don't know what, I just don't know what just happened.
And it's so hard to know how to respond in the situations too, because like I've gotten a few like DMs and stuff for people that listen to the podcast. And like obviously I love it. Like it's so thoughtful and like I love getting feedback. But then it's like, can I be casual with you or do I have to like keep a distance? Like what is okay? And I don't know the answer to that. I think that nobody really knows. You just have to play it by ear, you know?
Exactly. I mean, it's personally, it's one of the most flattering things in the world. And it means a lot to me when people say, I've heard of the book, I've seen the book around, I've seen you around, I've seen you at events, I've seen you on podcasts. And it makes me feel like I'm doing well. Like, like I said, there's no tangible metric, but like I'm succeeding. You know who I am. There's some brand recognition. But like you said, that there's that awkward internal process of how casual can I now be with this person? Because if anything goes wrong, this is also my job, it's my career,
Yeah.
it's my business. And you just kind of, I feel like I sometimes get into my head where I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. It does not compute. What do I do? But like you said, it's the coolest thing in the world when people say that to you. And like clearly they had a good experience interacting with whatever it is you're putting out there. So that's pretty cool.
Well, and like I think that anybody that knows anything about science knows like anecdotal evidence is nothing. But like if somebody comes out to you and says, "Hey, I love the thing you're doing," it feels like you've made it. Like it feels like you're doing the thing you're supposed to do. Because the truth is like I think that there's stats to say things like a very low percentage of people actually reach out to contact a creator if they like a thing that someone did, and I think that it's just kind of like whenever you do get somebody that breaks out, then it's like you actually are reaching a lot more people than that one person, even though it feels like
Yeah.
one person in the moment.
I got no other words. It's just so cool.
Y-
It's really, it means a lot for when people come up to you and say that when you're the one who's, like you're hosting a podcast, and so when people listen to it, it's got to feel great when you're reaching people. And I definitely know when people say anything to me, I just think it means so much that they even come up and say it. Like even if they're just thinking it, I don't know, but if they came up to me, it's now I have that. I know it's going to sound like not healthy at all, but I have that validation now
yeah.
that my work's getting out there. I'm doing okay.
Well, like you said, you so rarely get validation as a creative, as an indie creative, especially because like you don't have like a boss to tell you you've been doing a good job this quarter. Like all you can hope for is a positive review or good sales for
Exactly.
somebody to come out of the woodwork and tell you I loved your book.
Exactly. You're not getting that like end of the year promised bonus or anything from a big company. So a little bit of that scrap of validation means a lot.
Yeah, so I talked about this a little bit last interview. We talked about marketing and we talked about like how like the sort of like the random things that you sacrifice you don't realize you're going to be sacrificing when you go into this. Like I would love to have a personal Instagram account that I don't use for writing, but I don't have that kind of capacity to like have like personal social media and things like that because like you spend so much time developing things for your professional stuff that it's like I couldn't even think about how to take a picture for just me and my friends. Have you noticed sort of things like that you sort of like had to like you didn't expect to have to step away from, but you sort of have had to?
Actually, this is very poignant because recently I had the conversation with my boyfriend and my friends and things, and they were telling me, you should really do a professional Instagram, one for just writing. And I had one that I'm terrible about remembering that I have, so I never post on it. So I ended up spending, I think it was like 2 hours going through my entire Instagram and getting rid of anything that wasn't work related. And I was archiving it, so I wasn't losing pictures or anything. But it felt really weird to open my own Instagram and see just brand things all of a sudden. And it was, going back to you are your brand. So it was very weird to see my name and then wasn't pictures of my friends or my family or my dog or anything. Now it's just book stuff. So that was something. And like I'd like to have a TikTok and be hip with the youth and be doing like TikTok dances. My entire TikTok is about books. It's book jokes, book memes, me promoting my own book. So it's very curated to that. Which, and like I said, sometimes, I'd love to just dance like I'm 15 and just post a silly video. But, I'm building that TikTok following and, YouTube and Instagram and things like that. And now it's very much that unplanned kind of loss of having like a personal platform. I recognize I could definitely make an individual one, but I'm not going to remember I have to. So I just have to do what's best for me. Just have the one for each social media platform.
Well, the truth is, if I take a picture of my dog and I want to post it, I'm like, well, this could make me look relatable to people if I post it on my author, Instagram. So like even because I so rarely even think about taking personal video pictures for me and not for my brand. So it's sort of like I can't even imagine having to think about like doing something that's just for people that, which is so wild because so many people in the world like have these accounts just for their friends and family. Like I can't imagine what that is like. It's been so long since I've ever had that.
Yeah, I don't know how, especially for people when they have multiple accounts on like Instagram or things. I'm like, how do you keep up with this? Like, I have mine like password memorized where it just unlocks with my fingerprint or like my face. I can't remember to switch over and do these things. And my brain's filled with other things. So I don't have the mental capacity, I guess, to have multiple accounts on each platform. So I don't know how people do it.
Yeah, I fully agree. We're gonna take a quick break. Whenever we get back, we're gonna talk about book pitches and sort of like how to craft them and how to sell your book to other people. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Us Writers or Fans. I'm joined once again with Brooklyn Quintana. So the main reason I wanted to Quintana, right? I said it wrong that time.
Quintana, you
uh,
said actually not more better. That's terrible English. More,
we're
it's
writers,
Spanish.
guys.
It's Spanish, so it's Quintana, but my whole family just says Quintana and it's easier. So you actually said it better than I do.
Okay, I'll take it. So the reason I wanted to invite you on Brooklyn is because whenever we were at that adult book fair, you your book pitch was like so tight. Like you sort of like rattled it off in a way that felt like practiced in like a really like solid way. And I was blown away every time you said it. And you were right next to me. So like truly every time a customer passed by, I was like, who is this like robot? Like they could just like spit out this incredible pitch every time. So that's why I wanted to invite you on. But also like I think it's interesting to talk about like why this is so important because like you need book pitches in basically every part of the industry, right? Like if you're pitching to an agent, you need a book pitch. If you're pitching to a publisher, you need a book pitch. If you're selling at book fairs, you need a book pitch. If you're like trying to get anybody to sort of care about what you're doing, you need a book pitch. So it's one of those things that I think that everybody knows they need, but not everybody knows how to like craft one that's like good and catchy. So how did you sort of like approach this process? And then where have you sort of found value in what you do?
So I don't remember what class I was in when I was doing my bachelor's, but one of my teachers told us when you're pitching anything, whether because I was doing creative writing, so we did like scripts, short stories, books, all those things. So as when you were pitching anything, whether it's a book or a movie, like a screenplay, you have limited time in front of important people. So it's an elevator pitch. Like the network executive just walked into the elevator. You've got till floor 4 to get them hooked on your idea. And one of the things that they taught us was if you're going to do an elevator pitch, somehow find a way to relate your product to something similar that has already proved to be successful. So, like what I said was it's Harry Potter meets Game of Thrones with a Jumanji setting. Those are 3 very recognizable IPs that have all proven to make money. So now you've thrown them together. They're intrigued. These 3 things don't seem like they should go together. How does this go together? And then I usually, as you're very well aware, was ending everything with there's monsters, magic, mayhem, murder, and man-eating mermaids. It's alliterative, so it's fun to listen to. So people kind of pay attention because it's got that like M repeating, very rhythmic tone to it. So it's easy to listen to, and at least one of those things is going to catch your attention. So I always end with that. So definitely relating things to recognizable IPs that have already made money. And then when somebody says, okay, well, why is yours different? Now you have it in because they're at least curious as to how it relates to this thing, but how diverges and can be its own separate thing that maybe they want to get into, maybe they want to invest, maybe they want to publish, things like that. So I think that's very important advice that I received. And I always go through it. Another thing is if other people come up to you, so this happens a lot at events, book readers will come up to me and say, is it like this book? So one of the things I think for authors that you need to know in marketing is you have to be aware of your career. You have to be aware what's going on in the industry, what's popular. I said it on many, many podcasts, and I am 100% truthful. I'm not lying. I am not a big fantasy reader. I read Harry Potter as a kid. I read Game of Thrones in high school. Other than that, I very rarely pick up fantasy books. Not only because I don't want them to impact the way I'm writing, but I just naturally gravitate more towards nonfiction myself. I like fantasy. Clearly, I'm a fantasy author, and I like the whimsy and escapism. But 9.9 out of 10 times, if I pick up a fantasy book, it is going to be Harry Potter because it's that comforting nostalgia, which I think definitely has impacted the way I personally write. It is that older, like I said, Tolkien-esque, C.S. Lewis, J.K. Rowling, the 20th century early aughts type of fantasy. That's what I'm interested in. So modern fantasy, no dig against it. Very happy more people are reading. It's just not the kind of book I like reading. So that's how I ended up writing my book because that's the kind of book I wanted to read. But being aware of it, I am very aware of Fourth Wing. I hear about it constantly, and every single person always comes up to me and says, is it like Fourth Wing? And I have to say, it's got a military academy and a dragon, but other than that, absolutely not. Is completely different. And then people love the Sarah J. Maas series ACOTAR. So I know a lot about it. I have not read it, but it is my job to know that not only does it exist, but I could tell you about, Rhysand and Tamlin and Feyre. I know about them. So I think one of the big things in marketing is also knowing your industry in and out, even if certain aspects of it, like I said, don't really interest you. It's your job for these things to interest you and for you to know about them and be able to communicate them. Because the last thing I want is for somebody to come up to me and say, is it like, a Sarah J. Maas book, Throne of Glass? And for me to say, oh, yeah, it's fantasy just like that. And then they pick it up and they're like, what the hell is this? It's absolutely,
Yeah.
completely 100% different. And then I'm going to get a bad review because that person was expecting a completely different story and then got what I wrote. So it behooves me for you to know what you're coming into when you pick up my book, because the last thing I want is for you to think it's like a slapdash quick adventure with a bunch of spicy scenes everywhere in a very quick pace. It's none of those things. It's not going to be any of those things. And if you read it expecting that, it not only is it not going to be enjoyable for you, it hurts me because you're probably going to leave it a bad review now. So I think marketing wise, yeah, knowing the industry and having that very quick elevator pitch to be able to relay to an investor, to a reader, that IP that they already are familiar with. Like if you write a pirate story, whip out, Pirates of the Caribbean, everybody knows that one. So now they're kind of thinking along the lines of that story. It's recognizable. And then you can fill in the details of what's different about it.
It's such a good point about sort of like the micro targeting, because I think that a lot of times whenever you do marketing, you think I need to cast the widest net possible so that everybody knows about it. And then whenever everybody knows about it, then maybe the people that will like my stuff will find it. Which there's some truth to that. Like there is some like I need to cast a widest net so that other people can find it. But the other thing that I always say to people that are creatives is like everybody there's a market for everything. Like there's people that will love the thing you do, whatever that thing is. Like there will be people that love it, but it may not be everybody. But you got to find those people. And I think it's interesting to think about like you don't want people that won't love your book to pick it up, because that's how you get those bad reviews because they they're the people that, maybe you'll get another sell at a festival, but was that like $10 or what or less in most cases worth, the negative press you might get on like a Goodreads or whatever. So I think it is a thing to think about that I think a lot of us sort of forget because we're trying to cast these wide nets that maybe may or may not be productive.
I think sometimes wide nets in fishing are good because you can eat the fish. If you know there's fish in that water that you can eat as a person, wide nets are good. Wide nets are not good, I think, as you were saying, specifically, I think in the fantasy genre, just because, and I'd say even the most so in the past 15 or so years, it has really fractured into different camps. And if you catch fish outside of your camp, they're going to most likely hate it. Fantasy book readers, they're voracious readers. They're reading all the time, which I think is wonderful. Two, they're very passionate about what they're reading. Again, wonderful, except for when they attack other readers for not liking their special flavor of fantasy. And I've seen this a lot on Book Talk recently where it's all of a sudden everybody's turning on each other because, well, you like classic fantasy, but I like smutty fantasy, and this one likes Mothman fantasy. So we could all just be happy everybody's reading and literate. I think that's a win for all of us. We don't need to tear people down because they're reading, something that you don't like. I think we should just say, okay, that's not my cup of tea. So I think, like what you were saying, when you cast the wide net, now there's that chance of people who like fantasy aren't just people who like fantasy anymore. So, the Tolkien kids who would have been wide net fantasy people who would have been tenable to all these different genres, they don't exist anymore. There's now very hardcore people on every side, and there's lines drawn in the sand. And, crossing those lines could definitely hurt your book reviews, hurt your book sales. It makes you look bad as an author because now people think it's something it isn't. And it's a very weird thin ice kind of ground we're on now, I think, as fantasy authors, where you don't want to step on other people's toes and you don't want to make anybody mad. And sometimes you're just like, I have no idea why people are interested in this topic so much. Like hockey romance is a thing. I don't understand how that became its own genre. But it's just like all of these book readers, I'm like, I'm blown away. I'm so happy people are reading at least. But you don't want people who aren't in your niche at this point to get a hold of it and then hate it and ruin its reputation. You have to be very careful and targeted in your marketing, I think, nowadays.
And it is a thing that I think about a lot because, like, whenever my book was first published, I thought about like how to describe it because there's a lot of like love story elements to my book, but there's not a lot of spice. So I was very like hesitant to call it romance because it's like the plot is sort of driven by the love story, but there's not. I don't want people to think there's going to be sex scenes when there's not, basically, because like you're right, there is a very specific segment of the fantasy reader base that sort of like wants that and is looking for that now. And I was trying to sort of like make sure people weren't like doing it. But then I think the problem with that is that I was sort of like pushing away people that maybe like sort of like traditional rom-coms, because that's the sort of thing I was doing. And I think you got to figure out like how to accurately describe your book, but then also like to find those like comparatives that are like fine to include with it. Because I think that sometimes you get in your head a little bit about like, well, I can't say it's this because this is like not what it is.
Yeah, I definitely at the last event I was very much in my head about it. And I think to a certain degree as I'm working on book 3, it's creeped up again where I'm very in my head about it. And, when I sell the book or sign paperwork for it to be able to be sold in different bookstores and things, they always want me to tell them what genre it is. And every time I have like this like internal crisis of what genre to tell them, because it is a fantasy book. Most people don't go to the fantasy section in bookstores anymore because they go to romantasy or they go to YA.
Yeah.
And mine is by no means a romantasy book. You could never even grasp at straws to call it that. But it does have a 13-year-old in book one protagonist. So it falls into the very traditional sense of what a YA book is. But I'm so hesitant to always tell people it's YA because of modern YA, because it doesn't fit into that box that they've created. It doesn't have a breakneck speed plot. It doesn't have a young person rebelling to overthrow the, awful older generation government. There is no real romance in book one. It's like it fits in because Finn is 13 and it is very much a coming of age story in book one and an adventure. So that is a classic YA fantasy book. Finn is part of the establishment. He is a prince. He does not want to tear down the government. It's not going to happen. He's 13. He's not having a runaway romance with anybody. He's got monsters to fight. There's magic, there's things going on. He does not have time for icky girls at the moment. And it doesn't have like it took place over a week kind of time span. It takes place over 10 months. It has a slow burn introduction to introduce you to the world of this 9-book epic fantasy series. So it builds up. It's very much, and it's not plot driven like a Harry Potter or Percy Jackson. There is no Dark Lord. There is no evil Kronos god behind everything. Finn doesn't have a plot to go through. He is a person living his life under circumstances and things have happened to him. And, the greater plot of the series unfolds, but it's not a we have to fight Voldemort at the end of every school year type of plot. So it doesn't hit the classic trope. So I have every time this fear that if I classify it as YA, people are going to pick it up expecting those plot beats to be hit, and they're not going to be hit. It has a slow start. Then boom, we're at school and all of these things hit. And, he creates these relationships you don't think he's going to have. There is no big bad for him to fight. He doesn't even know the plot of his story. He's just going through school trying to not get killed on Nightmare Island. So it's so hard every time for me when people say, is it YA? I just blankly stare at them for a while and I'm like, okay, well, what do you mean by YA? And we'll discuss it. So it's hard. So I always just say it's fantasy. And then if they want more, I'm like, I don't care. I guess it's YA. Sure, why not?
Yeah. And I think what's so interesting about being an indie author that I think is sort of like a thing that separates us from the more trad pub stuff is that they have teams that tell them these things. Because like I've heard a lot of people describe genres as like you don't write a genre, like you write your book, whatever that book is that's in you, and then you got to figure out what genre it fits into after the fact. Like that's sort of like how you sort of sell it, is like placing it into those boxes after the fact. And I think it's hard to know like what can I and can I not do. And it's like you almost need like a marketing publicist kind of professional that could give you that guidance that I think a lot of trad pup people have, which maybe does lead to like the hesitance that we have because we don't know what we're, quote unquote, allowed to do when it comes to in this space. And maybe we're just overthinking it, but I don't know.
I mean, I know I'm definitely overthinking it. I'm a chronic overthinker, but like I said earlier, it is my job to overthink these things.
Yeah.
So I don't want people to expect one thing and get another and then be mad about it, because I don't want people to pick up my book and hate it. And I also don't want people to pick up my book and then give me a bad review because they didn't like it. I want people to like it, not just for like my personal sake, but just because I hate picking up a book and I end up hating it and then I have to finish it because I'm one of those people. So I don't want anybody to have that experience where they hate reading through it because they expected one thing and got another.
So one place that I think a book pitch is important that people may not think about is when you're pitching to bookstores, because like you want bookstores to sell your books, you got to like pitch to them to see if they're up for selling it. So I'm kind of curious what your experience has been like with bookstores, because like a lot of people in the indie author space sort of say that it's like you don't need bookstores, like it's irrelevant to do bookstores, but there's something special about seeing your book on a shelf, right? And also
Yeah,
it's a different
definitely.
avenue and a marketing opportunity to see for people to see it. Because I think that it lends credibility to your book if people see it on a shelf and they've seen it, a few times in the store. Because then they can like see the cover, think about it. Like it's a thing that sort of crosses their mind. And then when they see it somewhere else, it's like, oh, I'll go ahead and buy it because I've seen this book all around. Um, what has your experience been with like sort of that whole side of it?
But I think as I'm getting into especially like book 3 things, I spend a lot of time doing marketing. I've just really gotten into starting to pitch to bookstores. I just sent off an application to Wine. I have my book in a local bookshop down the street. So that was just really me going in. It was a small family owned bookstore and just talking to the people who own the store about books and what kind of books we like. And then they, agreed to take my book on, which was really cool. But I think a lot of the time with bookstores as an indie author, you get this very unfair stigmata about you where they say, well, it's indie published, so you didn't have an editor. I'm like, well, I did actually have a professional editor who worked at, I think it was
Yeah.
Random House or Penguin. So it's just like, I care. I'm not giving you my first draft. Like everything's done. Go look at the reviews. So that's very frustrating when they say we don't accept indie authors. And I think another frustrating thing about bookstores, because I found that going to the bookstores and talking to people and things definitely helps you get in the door. Living in Florida is a smidge limiting because it's not New York or California where you have agents and media hubs all around you and getting your book in that store is going to get it in front of more people type of deal. Living in an island town in South Florida is not exactly like the hub of media and books and things. So that means that I usually have to like drive up to Orlando and things to go sell my wares essentially as like a street salesman. I'm like, please take my book. So that's kind of frustrating, but like I said, I've just gotten into it. Hopefully it'll be in more stores soon. I did an event at Barnes and Noble. I'm still trying to barter with them to just get it in their stores instead of having select events. So fingers crossed on that. But yeah, getting it in stores definitely, I don't know if it means more to me because it's in a lot of online bookstores and Amazon and Barnes& and Noble online, but it is really cool, like you said, when you see your book on the shelf and you're like, "Damn, I wrote that. That's cool. It physically exists. I'm a real author now." But you were a real author the moment you published a book. So sometimes it's hard to separate the fact from the illusion of you've made it because it's on Barnes& and Noble's bookshelf.
Yeah, and I will say I have been shocked as an indie author at how accommodating Barnes and Noble is with like the events and stuff. Because like, so if you're an indie author, like hit up Barnes and Noble, like they will let you have a signing there almost guaranteed. Like they're pretty good about it. And I've been sort of shocked at how, because they're a corporation, like you wouldn't expect them to be like so into indie authors, but they really are, and I've appreciated that a lot. And also, I think what I've done a lot is I go to bookstores with no expectation. Like I don't expect them to put it on the shelf, but I give them a lot of, like I always give them a book, and I'll like sign it and I'll talk to them and all that stuff. And I think that whenever you go with no expectations, first of all, you're not disappointed whenever they don't put it on the shelf because you didn't expect that. But then also, I think they're more likely to sort of like not feel like you're trying to pressure them or sell to them or whatever. But it's weird because you are selling to them.
Yeah.
So, like, what has that been like? Have you do you think about that when you go in? Did you try to be like friendly and just a person, or do you try to be like a bit of a salesman?
I think it's probably a bit of both. Because, like I said, sometimes it's really hard to separate I'm just talking to this person with I'm working right now. So if it's my job, like my livelihood and my career, it very much depends on you saying yes and putting my book on your bookshelf.
Yeah.
But you also don't want to be smarmy and come in like I've got my sales sheet right here and will you pick it up? It's this weird tightrope I think you have to walk as an indie author because you don't have really, or at least most of us don't have formal representation and things, and you're going in there yourself doing most of, if not all of the work. So it's this very weird line where you're trying to sell them something, but you're also the something you're selling to
Yeah.
them. And it's just this weird thing where you're like, oh, will you hang up this poster to sell the book? Oh, right, I'm on the poster. So will you put me in your window? It's this
Yeah.
very strange. I had an event and I had to do that. And my friend was supposed to come with me because I'm not naturally extroverted, so I need somebody to, bolster me up a bit. And she bailed. So I'm out there alone and I'm asking this coffee shop by the bookstore on the island. I'm like, "Hey, can I hang up these flyers for this Barnes and Noble event?" And the lady's like, "Yeah." So I pin up the sign and she's like, "That's you." And I'm like, "Oh, right. I'm the one going to the event. I'm the author, actually. Thank you for hanging up my face in your store. That's cool." And then it's just like this weird. I'm selling myself. Would you want to go? Like, I'll sign your book. Like, it's such a weird job to have.
Yeah, I agree. It's one of those things that you sort of have to constantly keep in your head. Like we're all small business owners, right? When you go to bookstores, like you have to be aware that like this is also a small business owner. They also just want to make ends meet. They also just want to make money and survive. But also like you could really help me out a lot if you could put this book on your shelf. So it is a thing that you sort of have to keep in your head so that you try to not like you don't want to feel bad. Like you don't want to be upset whenever if they say no, because like there's reasons why they made that decision. You can be like you can be upset about it for a day or so, but like don't hold a grudge because ultimately you still want that bookstore to maybe have a signing one day, with you.
Exactly. Yeah. You don't want to burn bridges, but also, it does hurt when they say no and you're like, oh,
Yeah.
but it's good. I promise you. The reviews say it's good. So there is that where it's just like, oh, you're turning down my book, but it feels like you're turning me down. Like I asked you on a date and you said no, and now it's awkward. So yeah, I'm gonna stick with my statement. It's a very weird job to have when you're especially an indie author where there's nobody around you to help. You're just doing it yourself and you have to just hang your head in shame as you walk out the door of the bookstore. It's so strange.
So if anybody listening to this happens to like the specific pitch we have carved out for your book and would be somebody that will positively review it, where could they find out more about your stuff?
So you can find out more about me, where I've done other podcast and YouTube interviews, as well as like events I've done. I'm going to start doing a couple of public speaking things around Florida. So you could go to brooklynquintana.com. You can find the book on Barnes and Noble online, and it's on Amazon Prime. It's Phineas Fogg, Nine of Swords, and book two is Phineas Fogg, Blood in the Water. They're both out. Look out for book three. And then phineasfogg.com has information about when book three is going to be releasing, links to buy book one and two, and then it's going to start having short stories popping up, hopefully, in the next couple of months. And working on an Audible book. So hopefully 2025, fingers crossed, that'll be out.
All right. Thanks so much, Brooklyn. This has been great.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Most Writers Are Fans is a Starlight King production. Special thanks to our guest, Brooklyn Quintana. The audio and video for this episode of Most Writers Are Fans is edited by Bryn Russell. You can find video episodes of Most Writers Are Fans on YouTube and Spotify. If you'd like to support the podcast, please rate and review it. Also, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you'd like to send a message or record a voice message or leave a comment, please visit mostwritersaretfans.com. You can also email us at press@starlightkingpress.com. Thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be afraid to tell your story.